Okay, everybody, so I'm going to try to the best of my ability here to explain some things about aesthetics, and this is much easier to do with back and forth discussion, but I will try my best. Anyway, you watch some videos on aesthetics. I am sure some of you are a little confused by them. You should know that those concepts will be in some ways connected to what we're doing, but they're not central to the entire novel. So if there were parts of that you were unclear on, you're probably fine. But I do want you to know some of it and be a little bit familiar with it because it's a big part of the novel. So what I have in front of you here is the preface from Dorian Gray. I took some parts of it and just put them on the screen here. I did not put the whole thing. He talks, Oscar Wilde that is, about a number of different things about art. And if you read it carefully, you might realize that some of them even seem to contradict each other. So Oscar Wilde purports that those are his views on art, and they are sacrosanct because he is an artist and that's what he thinks. But some of them do tend to contradict. So anyway, let's look here. He talked about the viewer, and he said some things like the highest as the lowest form of criticism is a mode of autobiography. In other words, um, when you look at art, you sort of see what you want to see, stuff from your autobiography, your own life. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Not only does this imply that those who people can be corrupt and charming, and that's not a fault, but also it suggests that if you see something bad in art, that's because there's something bad in you. And he goes on to say, those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these there is hope. So those who think art is beautiful and find it to be so are obviously good people, or people who have beauty in themselves. He also says all art is at once surface and symbol. If you go beneath the surface, you do so at your peril, and those who read the symbols do so at their peril. So this suggests that maybe there is something in the art other than what you just bring to it, something to consider. And he also says it is the spectator and not life that art really mirrors. In other words, art is a mirror of you, not life. Um, Interesting concept, but not always quite so easy to prove. The role of the artist, he talks about that as well. He says the artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim. In other words, the art is not about the artist, but about the beauty that he's trying to portray. So it's not something related necessarily to the artist. And I am using he as the pronoun here mostly because I'm talking about Wilde. No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. That just goes to show you that sometimes here he's being somewhat flippant and he's trying to be witty, because the idea that no artist desires to prove anything, I think we can usually disprove that. But also, he's clearly just showing you here that maybe that's a little tongue-in-cheek, maybe not totally serious. And he also says no artist has ethical sympathies. And I think that's something that we usually find not to be true. Now, to the extent that the artist and the art are connected, that's a question we could ask. And that's certainly something he's asking you to think about, but it's not always super clear. There is no such thing, here these are about morality in art. There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all. Interesting theory. It says that a work of art can't be good or bad morally. It might be good or bad as far as taste, but it can't be good or bad morally. It can't have a moral component to it. That's something we can think about. I should say here that when we're talking about art, Wilde often talks about art as a general thing. Art can be anything that we would consider to be some sort of creative expression. So art can be visual arts, it can be literature, it can be music, it can be theater, it can be oh, just about anything you can think of that might qualify. Some people would even say chefs are artists. So you can certainly go into a lot of different areas and call them art. The moral life of man forms part of the subject matter of the artist, but the morality of art consists in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. So that's a little complicated, but basically, um, that morality and the moral life of man can be a subject, but art's only morality is that the medium is imperfect. Art itself is perfect. And then this is more interesting. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials for an art. In other words, they're not good and bad in of themselves. Vice is bad and virtue is good. But he's saying those are not really value judgments we should make. They're just ways of looking at something an artist can use to make art, not really ways of looking at it. Sorry. Okay, and he does say at the end, and this is entertaining: the only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. So he is basically saying that art is useless and it is just there to be admired. However, this is something that is going to be trotted out quite a bit at his trial. Stuff from his own art, used to prove his own ideas about his sexuality and his behaviors and stuff like that. So, certainly the public did not agree with him on a lot of these things, and they did think that there was more of him in these texts than what maybe met the eye. In other words, they went below the surface at their own peril. Now, what I want to show you are a couple things here, and these are important questions I think that you can think of. These are easier ways to maybe think of aesthetics. One, can art be political or have a motivation other than creating something beautiful? Does it have to have a use? So let's look at this one for that. This is by Norman Rockwell, and hold on, I'm going to increase the size. I don't know if I can increase the screen here, but I'll try. Hang on. So this is a Norman Rockwell painting. Okay, now you remember Norman Rockwell, perhaps, the guy who did all those scenes of traditional American life, and traditional is kind of in quotes there, but, you know, the people carving the turkey at Thanksgiving and those sort of Christmas, postcard looking paintings. This one clearly is very different. If you look, there are many components to this. This is obviously a young African American girl being taken to school by U.S. Marshals in the forced desegregation of the South. There is a racial slur written here on the wall. We have a tomato being thrown. There is a lot to this. It's an interesting composition, but I would say that, yeah, there's definitely some political component to this, right? You can see kind of how Norman Rockwell might take this. Now, maybe I'm putting my own bias into that. Maybe somebody who was not in support of segregation could have thought that Norman Rockwell was supporting their idea. But it's not like the tomato hit the girl. Her dress is white. It's completely white. That's obviously white for a reason. But also, it's not like she got dirty. It's not as though she's being treated badly. And I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing to consider. But when he says art can't be political or can't be moral, this would tend to make us think that maybe there is a point to this. Maybe Norman Rockwell is doing more here than just trying to entertain you. Because who would really put this up in their house just for entertainment value? Okay, let's look at some other ones. All right, what do you think of this one? I mean, it's okay, right? It's not the best painting you've ever seen, probably. Oscar Wilde would probably have some things to say about it, but it's not horrible. I mean, it's better than I could do, probably. And does it seem to have any kind of meaning or depth to it? Is it have anything to it other than just a scene of a stream here in the mountains? Okay, so you probably formed an opinion on this. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but you probably don't have a strong reaction to it. What if I tell you this was painted by Adolf Hitler? Because it actually was. Does that make this piece of art in itself bad? And I don't mean bad as far as like he didn't do a great job. I mean, does it make it evil? Does this art have a purpose that it's trying to portray? That's something to consider, and something you would want to consider because for us, the idea that Wilde is a homosexual and that his art might in some ways delve into those parts of his life isn't really that shocking, and most of us probably don't find it all that immoral. It's something that we are more used to. But for the Victorians, this would have been highly shocking. Now, of course, I'm not trying to compare somebody having gay subtext in a novel to Adolf Hitler's painting. But what I'm saying is that, when you think of art and morality and the morality of the artist, depending on your culture, you might have some different ideas on that. So it's not as easy to say, well, that can never really be the case. Would you want to own a painting done by Hitler? I'm guessing not. But if we look at another one here, this is another one Hitler painted. Now, some of you who took German would recognize this as the Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria. This is a symbol of Germany in quite a number of ways. It's also a symbol of Germany as kind of its own little state, and it goes along well with a lot of the fascist ideals and the ideas they were trying to portray of Germany as this Aryan medieval paradise. So even though this piece of art looks pretty harmless, it does play into, in some ways, Hitler's ideologies and Hitler's propaganda. Now, is this overt like the Norman Rockwell? No. No, probably not. But is it something we can consider in a moral way? Maybe. So let's go back very quickly to the other document here. So I think we've talked about most of these, but we also want to consider how much do our own perceptions affect how we view a work of art. You know, if you are predisposed to like a certain type of thing, will that make you like art of a certain type, or will it not? If you have issues with fascism, which I assume many of us do, then I would think that would make you not like Hitler's paintings quite as much. But can you really judge them based on that? How do your own perceptions affect that? So these are things that we want to consider as we go through reading with the novel itself, and also consider how the Victorians would have felt about all this. You know, obviously, since they used his art in a trial, they felt it could be politically or socially motivated. And they did think that his immorality in their eyes could taint his novels and his other works. And, of course, they had their own perceptions, and that certainly did taint their, feelings towards his art. Whether or not those things were right or should be the case is debatable, but whether they happened is just a fact. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. This stuff is a little complicated. Again, if you're a little confused, it's not the end of the world. There are just some questions that dealt with aesthetics and art, and I felt like I should go over some of it. So I hope that provides some clarification. And again, questions, get in touch.